Hey y'all, we're gonna do the cumulative portion of the final exam review. Today, this is actually our last SI session, which is super sad and super exciting. This is my last one ever, but we're gonna do it because I'm tired and I'm ready for a nap. And if I can do this, I can take a nap. So, that's real motivation. Also, I've been watching TikToks for the last 25 minutes. I like, if I'm being honest. Okay, let's do this thing. Okay. Alright, y'all. So we're gonna do the cumulative portion, and I just want you to remember that you have the website, you have the YouTube, you have all the YouTube playlists, you have all my sessions, you have Scoggins notes, you have my Quizlets, you have Lauren's Quizlets. There's lots available to you, and I will be, even though SI ends on Friday, if you message me back in their mind, I will totally hit you back if you have any questions or anything, and I will put both of the keys up for the reviews that I'm going over soon, so that you have everything that you need. I'm sure you're all going to do great. Don't forget to register for classes for the fall or for the summer or whatever makes you happy. And then don't also forget that pass fail. I think that deadline's coming up soon. So don't forget to change that if you need to. But anywho, let's do this thing. Okay. All right. So cumulative portion, right? So this is everything you've learned since then. So this should be easier than your nervous system portion because it's the old stuff. Sorry, my toes are cold. Okay, so right, so we have, we're starting off with structural organization, right? So chemical being the smallest, and then organismal being the largest, right? Chemical, atoms, molecules, organelles, that itty bitty stuff. And then we have the cellular level, right? Which is literally the cells, which is the structural unit of life. They really like to ask what the structural unit of life is, and people get really confused. The cell, right? The cell comprises everything, and so it is therefore a structural unit of life. Then we have a tissue, which is a group of similar cells that work together for a function, right? And then an organ is lots of tissues that work together for another similar function. And then an organ system are organs that work closely together. And then an organismal level is just all of the organs combined to make an organism, okay? So then we have lots of organ systems, right? We have, let's see, you know what I'm gonna do? I'll highlight what I think is important. So the integumentary system is, it synthesizes vitamin D. It has, it's the external body covering. It protects. The skeletal system protects, and it provides a framework, and it has, and it's hematopoiesis, right? Which is that formation of red blood cells, okay? Muscular system is, it produces or it maintains posture and produces heat. Our nervous system is our fast action control system, right? This uses muscles and glands and hormones to signal different parts of our body to do things for our nervous system. So the endocrine system are the things that secrete the hormones. They regulate growth, reproduction, and metabolism, okay? The cardiovascular system is the transport, and it gets rid of nutrients and waste, so it's transported, okay? Our respiratory system is the exchange, but the cardiovascular system is the transport. So a lot of the time, they'll do a matching with this, and don't get confused between transport and exchange. All right, lymphatic system is your immunity, right? This is where our white blood cells are found and where our immunity is part of, okay? Digestive system breaks down food so that we can absorb it, okay? The urinary system eliminates nitrogenous waste like ammonia and ammonium and things that we don't need in our body or things that we don't want anymore. And it regulates water. They always use this one, and then you're like, what is regulating water, or what does this acid-base balance? And that is your urinary system, okay? And then your reproductive system is to produce offspring, right? And that's sperm and eggs for male and female. All right, so protons, I don't want to be there anymore. So protons have a positive charge, okay? We know that. They're in the center of an atom, or of a molecule, or an atom. A neutron has no charge, okay? An electron has a negative charge, but it has almost no mass. So it literally is like massless, it's so small. And then our atomic number is the number of protons. He'll probably give you like a little atomic symbol or whatever, and then there'll be numbers, and they'll ask you which one's the atomic number, which one's the atomic mass, right? How many protons, how many neutrons, and how many electrons. So I'm sure you can look up practice questions of that if you need it. All right, so to change the number of protons changes the entire element, right? So if we change the number of protons, we're a totally different person. I always say that the protons is your brain. So even if we take my brain and put it in someone else's body, the same number of protons, it's still me, okay? But if we put you in my body, you're a different number of protons, totally different number of person, totally different person, okay? So if you change the amount of neutrons, you get an isotope, and therefore it changes the mass number, right? Because the mass number is how much mass it is, and so we're changing the amount of neutrons that do have mass, so it changes our mass number, right? So our mass total, but it doesn't change the atomic number because the atomic number has to do with our protons and the element's identity, okay? The identity. If you gain an electron, so if you gain an electron, meaning you gain a negative charge, you become an anion and you become negatively charged. If you lose an electron, right, so you lose a negative charge, you will therefore be positive, right, because we've lost negative charge, so therefore we'll be positive and we'll have a positive charge. What are chemical bonds and what subatomic particles are involved? So we say that they're energy relationships between electrons and the reacting atoms. So it's literally an energy relationship between this electron and this electron. And now that they're dating or bonded or whatever, that they're holding hands, it's an energy relationship. Sorry, the pinky didn't want to be part of the relationship, okay? What is the octet rule? So every element, most of them, there are a couple exceptions, want to have 8 electrons in their valence shell. And if you don't remember, the valence shell is that outer shell, the last shell, and they want to have 8 electrons in their shell. And that's why we have all these reactions at all, is because we're trying to get to that right number. And the noble gases, right, they have a complete octet. And so that's why they don't react at all. They're called inert, okay? What are ions and ionic bonds? So ions are things that have gained or lost electrons. So they're no longer than that base neutral charge. Okay, they either are positive or negative based on if they lose. Got an email apparently. Based on if they lose or if they gain an electron. Okay, interesting. Sorry. Okay, and then ionic bonds involve transfer of electrons, right? So if we were a covalent bond and we were going to share an electron, we would hold hands. Okay, we're sharing, right? We'd share it. However, if it's an ionic bond, this is my AirPods case. It's an ionic bond, right? And this is my electron, and this is one atom, and this is another. We're going to transfer. Now I have it in this hand, and I don't have it in this, and this is a transfer. It's not a share, right? Which is covalent, right? We're transferring. Okay. What are covalent bonds, right? These are sharing of 2 or more electrons, okay? And you can create single, double, or triple bonds, and it's 2, 4, or 6 electrons. So, yes. All right, so there are polar and non-polar bonds. So, say this atom is way more electronegative than this atom, okay? That means if we're in a covalent bond together, maybe the one that has more electronegativity is going to hold that electron longer, right? It's going to orbit that one longer, and then it will come to this one shorter amount of time because it has more pull, because it's more negative and it wants it more, right? It's greedier, okay? I can put myself here, and then I'm like looking at you, sorry. All right, what are hydrogen bonds? So hydrogen bonds are an electromagnetic attraction. It's not a true bond between a hydrogen and a nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine, right? So these create dipoles like water. Those are the only elements that can bond. It's hydrogen and oxygen, hydrogen and nitrogen, hydrogen and fluorine, okay? What is the difference between anabolic and catabolic reactions? So catabolic, I always say that cats destroy things. So that means we're destroying that bond. So we're breaking that bond and therefore releasing energy, right? And so if we're releasing energy, it's exergonic, which means the energy is exiting, okay? And then an endergonic or an anabolic is we're making something, so we're creating a bond, and so we need energy to create that bond, right? If we break a bond and energy is released, it's because it was stored here. If we're making a bond, we need something to store, so we need energy to go in, and so those are endergonic, and they require energy to go in, okay? So there are kinds of carbohydrates. So we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides, right? Monosaccharides they're one. It's just one monomer, right? It's a simple sugar, contains 3 to 7 carbons, right? These examples are ribose and deoxyribose, which are part of your DNA. They like to ask about that. They like to be like, is DNA a monosaccharide, right? So it contains ribose and deoxyribose, which are part of DNA, which are monosaccharides. And then we have disaccharides, which are just double sugars. Okay, it's 2 monosaccharides put together. Sucrose, maltose, lactose, those are all just different kinds of monosaccharides put together that make a compound. And then we have polysaccharides, which are long chains of monosaccharides, right? These are glycogen and things like that, where we store a bunch of glucose or a bunch of whatever together, and it makes this long chain that we store. What are lipids and what are the 3 classes? So a lipid is an organic molecule, and anything that has carbon and hydrogen are organic, right? So we're organic beings, right? They say organic life and things like that. However, the chemistry labs that you'll probably take are inorganic because you're not dealing with lots of carbons and hydrogens, you're dealing with lots of other things. So a lipid is an organic molecule that is insoluble in water. So it's just, a lipid is like a fat. And you know that fats don't dissolve in water because the saying goes that like dissolves like. So water is polar, and so lipids are nonpolar, right? They don't dissolve in water. You know that. So the saying goes that like dissolves like. So water is polar and lipids are nonpolar, so they don't dissolve in each other, right? But if you put water and salt together, right, and they're both polar, they will dissolve, right? Or milk or something like that, okay? So we have 3 classes. We have triglycerides, and then we have triglycerides, phospholipids, and steroids, right? Under triglycerides, we have saturated and unsaturated fats. Saturated fats is when we have all the hydrogens fill those bonds, right? If there's 4 bonds on something, all of them are filled with hydrogen. They're saturated with hydrogens, and they're solid at room temperature, okay? These are your butters, right? Things like that. Things that are, your saturated fats are usually are bad for you. So anything that's high in saturated fat has lots of butter or things like that in it. Now we have unsaturated fats, which are your healthy ones. This is like olive oil, anything that's liquid at room temperature. And these have double bonds in the structure, and so therefore it's not saturated with hydrogens, okay? Then we have phospholipids, and so these are just modified triglycerides. These are those polar heads. These are the ones with the little polar head and the non-polar tails, okay? And they make up your plasma membrane. I don't want this here, whatever. Okay, and then we have steroids, which includes cholesterol, right? It's a 4 interlocking ring structure, and they build vitamin D, bile salts, and they're important for synthesis of membrane structure, right? So there's lots of other things. Lots of your hormones are steroids. So there's lots of other things that are important about steroids that are not about the gym and being swole and things like that. So what are proteins? They have the most varied, why is this not working for me? They have the most varied function. They're used for lots and lots of things in our body, like make up muscle, make up amino acids, things like that. And they're held together by peptide bonds. How are proteins classified? They are classified by their shape and their function. Okay, so we're gonna do structure, right? And we're gonna do shape. So function and shape. So our function, right? So we have primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. So these are just however many layers of complexity we have. So primary is that linear sequence of amino acids. It's just a bunch of amino acids put together. Secondary is how the amino acids like this interact with each other. So we have those alpha helices, which look like ribbons, and then we have the beta pleated sheets, which literally look like a pleated skirt. If you've ever seen it, a pleated skirt. If you're a girl, you'll probably know what that is. If you're a guy, Google it. That's exactly what they look like. It's very interesting. Tertiary is how secondary structure interacts with each other. So how alpha helices and beta pleated sheets interact with each other. And then quaternary is how two different polypeptides interact with each other. So two of their own things, of their own proteins, interact together, okay? And so then we have two shapes of our proteins. We have fibrous and globular. So if you remember in muscle fibers, right, that we have myosin, globular head, and then we have actins, fibers, right? So fibrous is strand-like, they're water-soluble, example, and they have a really high tensile strength, so they're really strong if we were to pull on them. So they are keratin and elastin are some good examples. We have globular shape. I said globular head. Like enzymes, antibodies, things like that. They're spherical, they're water soluble, okay? What are nucleic acids? So nucleic acids are the largest molecule in the body and they're made up of monomers, right? Everything is a monomer. So this one's is called a nucleotide. And these pretty much make up the information of your entire body, right? They make up DNA and RNA, okay? So pH scale. If you can draw this, you know what we're talking about. So neutral is when we're at a pH of 7. We have an equal amount of hydrogen ions and hydroxyl ions. However, we have way more hydrogen ions, and so that makes us acidic, and that our pHs are from 0 to about 6.99. And then if we have more hydroxyl ions, we're going to be basic, and so that's from pHs of 7.01 to 14. What are the properties of water, and what is the most important, and why does it? What are the properties of water, and what makes it the most important organic compound? So it has a high heat capacity, high heat of vaporization. It's polar, and it has the properties of a solvent that's polar. It has reactivity, and it's cushioning. So high heat capacity means, you know, when you go in the ocean and it's really, really hot outside, and so you expect the ocean to be like pretty warm, and it's not. Right, so that's because water has a high heat capacity, so it takes a lot of energy put into water for it to change temperature. High heat of vaporization kind of goes along with that, is that because it takes such a high amount of heat to put in it to change its temperature, it therefore has an even higher energy need to evaporate it, right, from it to go from a solid liquid to a gas, right? So then our polar solvent properties is water is polar, and so it has polar solvent properties, so it dissolves in polar things. It has charged molecules, and it's our body's major transport medium. It has reactivity, so it's part of hydrolysis and dehydration synthesis, right? Hydrolysis is when we use water to break things apart, and dehydration synthesis is when we use water to put things together. And then it's part of our cushioning, so it protects our organs from trauma and keeps them safe. Post TikTok break, part 1. Halfway. And I had to pee, so I don't know any of the dances, and I don't really want to. I just want to watch. What's the plasma membrane? So the plasma membrane's function is it's sort of the barrier between the inside of the cell, right, the intracellular fluid, and the extracellular fluid, which is what ICF and ECF stand for. It allows us to adhere to other cells. It allows us to identify the cell itself or other cells. It has lots of different functions. So it's also called the fluid mosaic model or the semi-permeable membrane. And it's just made up of all those phospholipids that protect from the outside and the inside of the cell and let things come in and out as the cell asks for it. All right, so we have some organelles. We have nucleus, ribosomes, and mitochondria. The nucleus is the most important. It's our genetic library. It's our blueprint for our DNA are held, and this is where we synthesize all of our genetic material, okay? We have ribosomes. These are where we synthesize proteins. We have free ribosomes, and we have membrane-bound ribosomes that are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, which are attached to the nucleus. And then we have the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. This is where we produce ATP, and this is actually part of the symbiotic our endosymbiotic theory, which is where it has its own DNA, own membrane, and its own ribosomes. So it was thought that this was absorbed lots and lots of years ago. One cell was like, yo, this is a cool little thing, and it absorbed it, and it was like, yo, we should keep this. It does cool things. This could help us out, okay? So mitosis is just when we divide the nucleus and we end up creating two new cells that are the same. So we're pretty much making brand new cells. And then cytokinesis is not technically part of the stages of mitosis. It's the very end where we split the cytoplasm, right? We go from that, we split the cytoplasm and we make two separate cells. So there are 4 basic types of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Epithelial tissue is classified by the number of layers, right? Simple or stratified, 1 or more layers, and then the shape: squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. What are the 2 major ways that tissues can be repaired? So there's regeneration, where the same kind of tissue is put down and it has the same original function. And then we have fibrosis, which is where we don't actually replace it with the original tissue and our function is lost, but we actually connect those pieces and we repair it, but it doesn't do the same function. The steps of tissue repair are inflammation, organization, regeneration, and fibrosis or fibrosis. Inflammation is that first time you get a cut and it gets really hot and red and all the blood is drawn there so that all the lymphocytes and anything that it needs to start rebuilding can get to the site where it needs it, okay? And remember, those are, inflammation is produced by mast cells, remember that? Maybe? And then we have organization, right, which is where we restore the blood supply and we kind of start to organize what cells we need and where things are supposed to go. And then we have regeneration or fibrosis. So at the end, after we've done that, we either regenerate the same kinds of cells and the function is restored, or we have fibrosis where it's the old function is not restored and it's a different kind of cells. Okay, what are the basic coverings and linings? So we have a cutaneous, which is why it's different. It's that dry skin membrane. It's composed of stratified squamous epithelium, and it's that thick layer of dermis. So this one is important, and they always ask for this because it's different. It's the dry membrane. Okay. The mucous membrane lines the body cavities open to the exterior. So anything in your digestive tract, right? Because we're eating food and that stuff's not sterile. And so that is going to be open to the outside, to the exterior. And then we have the serous, right? I think of S and S, so serous and sterile. These are our closed body cavities where it is sterile. If we were to open that up inside of you, we would have to be in a sterile environment to make sure that there wasn't anything in there that we didn't want. So with the 6 functions of the integumentary system are protection, temperature regulation, stimulus perception, excretion, synthesis of vitamin D, and blood and water reservoir. So there are 2 distinct layers of the skin, right? There's that epidermis and then there's that dermis. The hypodermis is not part of the skin. It's actually part of the superficial fascia. It's an underlying connective tissue layer. But the epidermis, right, is avascular but innervated. So that means that there's no direct blood supply, but it does have nerve endings, right, which is why we can feel, okay? And then there's those layers, right? So basale is your bottom layer. So it goes, so basale is your bottom and corneum is your top. My little mnemonic is come, let's get some bread. Come, let's get some babies. Come, let's get some beverages, whatever works for you. And the stratum lucidium is found only in thick skin, like in the palms and soles of your feet. And then we have the dermis. And there's 2 layers in the dermis. There's the papillary and reticular layer. The papillary layer has those dermal ridges. It has mesenteric corpuscles, and it also gives rise to things that create our fingerprints. Okay. And then we have a reticular layer, which is where our blood vessels are. Right. We have these cleavage and tension lines. And those are where our surgeons cut, right? And so they try and cut in these areas. It's like cutting meat with the grain or cutting wood with the grain, and so that it heals better. And then it also has the dermal folds right near, like if you've ever seen your elbow, right? There's little folds right there. And those are the flexure lines based on how our joints pull things. So then we talked about our hypodermis. It's that deep subcutaneous layer. It's not part of the skin, but it does anchor the skin to the muscles and connective tissues and things like that. Okay, so sudoriferous and sebaceous glands. So sudoriferous glands are sweat glands and sebaceous glands are oil glands. So I like to remember that oil gland or oil is also called sebum. And so sebum looks like sebaceous. And so if you were a sebum, if you were literally a sebum who slept on the beach, your hair would be really oily, right? Okay, so it's sebaceous, oil glands, sebum, oily hair. And then sudoriferous glands are the sweat glands. So the skeletal system has 7 functions. It's support, protection, movement, mineral growth, and growth factor storage. That one is important. People forget that. Blood cell formation, triglyceride or fat storage, and hormone production. So we protect the brain, the spinal cord, everything is kind of encased in our bones and our skeletal system to protect it. And then our bones actually act as levers for our muscles, right? If we didn't have our bones, our muscles are no good. And then we actually store calcium and phosphorus in our bones, right? Which is a part of what makes them so strong. And then we have blood cell formation, which is also known as hematopoiesis. We have triglyceride and fat storage, which is this little, inside this little pore, which is the medullary cavity, there's this little yellow fat storage, which is actually stored for extra energy if we needed it, if something was to go wrong and we needed extra energy. And then we have actually hormone production. This one is super, super important. Remember about osteocalcin and parathyroid hormone. So you need to make sure that you know what calcitonin and parathyroid hormone do. And so then I'm not going to talk about this. This is just the parts of your bones, okay? There are 2 ways we can ossify bone. Okay, break 3 completed. We got this. I got like a page and a half left. I'm sorry, my stamina is low. My coffee was gross. And so now I'm like, oh, melty. Okay. Cool. Okay, so there are 2 kinds of ossification. There's endochondral and intramembranous. Okay, turn my face forward. Endochondral forms all your bones except for your skull and your clavicles. Okay, so it has 2 ossification centers, right? And it appears on the outside, right? And then intramembranous begins with those mesenchymal cells, if you remember what a mesenchymal cell is. And they secrete stuff for your flat bones, right? Like, so your skull and your clavicles, these only have 1 ossification center and they form bone between. All right, so how is bone remodeling controlled? So hormone controls and mechanical stress. So for our hormone controls, we're talking about calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. So parathyroid hormone is released in response to low blood calcium, which means we are going to stimulate osteoclasts, which break down to break down some bone and therefore release calcium into the blood, okay? Calcitonin, on the other hand, is released in response to high blood calcium, and so that stimulates osteoblasts to build more bone and therefore use the calcium in the blood to go into that bone. All right, so our other way is in response to mechanical stress. So if you go to the gym a bunch and you start to build muscle, your bones are going to grow with you, because the more tension you put on those muscles or the more weight they have to bear as far as musculature or whatever, they will grow with you. So they reflect the stressors they encounter. So if you're sitting on the couch all the time and you're not doing anything, your bones will reflect that. It's like how in the show, I want it to be later, literally how in the show Bones, they're like, your daughter, she did. And they were like, how did you know? And she's like, it's her bones. Boom, show. There's a whole freaking show. Okay, so Wolff's Law states that bones grow or remodel in response to demands placed on them. So whatever demands we ask of them, the bones will change to accommodate us. All right, muscular system. We just did this. I believe in you. So its function is to produce movement, to maintain posture and body position, to stabilize joints and generate heat as they contract. So these are some beautiful little pictures of a sarcomere and of the whole muscle, the fascicle, the muscle fiber, and then the myofibril and the sarcomere. Okay, this is just kind of your breakdown. Here is here's it in words. I really recommend that video. If you never watched that video on the playlist, it's like this weird British lady, but the animation is dope for understanding the muscular system. So there are 4 steps in muscle contraction. So our nerve stimulation is first. We have to have a nerve stimulation to do anything. So the axon terminal and muscle fiber are separated by that synaptic cleft, right? And then when the nerve is stimulated, the acetylcholine is released from the axon terminal and travels across the synaptic cleft and binds to the acetylcholine receptors on the sarcolemma, okay? And then an action potential is generated, which is caused by a change in voltage across the membrane, right? We talk a lot about that in the nervous system. And then we depolarize, right, which means we go farther away from that negative 70 millivolts, and we fire an action potential. So we have to, okay, so we have to generate an action potential through that voltage change, and then it has to be traveled along the sarcolemma. So it travels down the T tubules and then into the sarcoplasmic reticulum to send that signal everywhere. And so then our calcium must rise because the calcium is released from that sarcoplasmic reticulum, which allows it to bind to troponin to move tropomyosin so that that actin myosin head can make that bind and then ratchet and therefore contract, okay? This is the start to finish. The video is better than reading it. All right, so calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And so calcium is super important because unless we bind that troponin, that tropomyosin stays in the way of the myosin binding site. So you have to make sure that you have calcium. And ATP is so important because if you don't have ATP, you can't make that cross bridge, and you also can't release the cross bridge, okay? The homeostatic imbalance for this by lack of acetylcholine is myasthenia gravis, right? That's drooping of the eyelids, you can't maintain the weight of your head, right? That's just a lot of muscle tone issues. And then I don't think y'all learn this, 41. And then the myofilaments do not change length. They do not change length. So they start here and they get closer together, but they're the same length the whole time. We're just getting shorter as far as the sarcomere is shortening. Okay, that's the smallest contractile unit of the muscle, but the fibers are the same length. Okay, friends, that is it. And please let me know if you have any questions. You have everything on the website and all that good fun jazz. Please let me know if you need anything and I will respond to you or help you out in any way that I can. I'm going to post the key for this, and this is going to air Thursday night. But thank you guys for hanging out and coming to SI, and I hope you kill your finals. And I believe in you, and feel free to say hi to me on campus anytime. But have a great rest of your semester, and thanks for hanging out with me, y'all.